pick it up. Can't really see it, but if I keep, oh my god, I'm gonna burn them. Very, very stiff. Arms, no wiggle. And the motors are very hot. Coming to you guys from a Sunday afternoon hike because I owe kind of everybody a reason why I haven't really been available making much videos lately, and that's really because COVID is an incredibly popular time to have any dental work done, not just crowns and fillings and whatnot, but lots of surgery, lots of missing teeth, full mouth rehabs, lots of stuff. So I don't really get paid much by YouTube. Like, it's basically a dinner once a month, and the store, the FPVCycle store, me and my partner Josh don't take a dime out of it yet. I mean, we're not planning on it anytime soon because we're 100% focused on developing. Also, I have a very long list of things on my desk that I have not had a chance to review. That DJI review and the Emax review, as you could tell, I barely knew what the name of that Emax thing was because I just haven't had much time to mess around with this stuff because it just isn't worth my time at the moment when I have so much work to do at actual work that pays me. So one thing I do want to point out is that this is a one-axis gimbal made by Maker Boys. These guys have made a couple of products in the past that have been pretty interesting. And hold on while I pass these other people. And so I pointed out because I really like these guys, and I'm really sorry that I've had this thing for I think 8 months now, and I haven't had a chance to even put it on a quad. Anyways, this video is about ramp up power specifically. I felt like ramp up power was a very costly finding to find, but also a very valuable finding to learn what it does and how it works, or at least in part. And I feel like it is a significant enough finding to make a video roughly about tuning with ramp up power in mind. So if you guys know me, you know that number one, I hate tuning, and number two, I suck at tuning. I'm the kind of person that will spend a couple hours tuning a quad, going through 10-15 batteries just to end up with something that is significantly worse than it was when I started. I don't think that my experience is unique. I think it's an experience that a lot of people can relate to because tuning has just gotten so complicated over the years, and it's for good reason and for annoying reasons, but it has gotten complicated. And the emphasis has moved off of PID tuning because we now understand more about what's going on and the information coming out of the gyro. Not like we didn't understand it before. I don't even write the code, so I don't understand anything. I just kind of work with it, and I'm just giving you a view from outside in. And a huge disclaimer before I talk about anything, this may or may not work for your quad, may or may not work for whatever you're trying to do. I found it working really well for a number of quads that I've been trying to deal with. And so let's just jump right into it. So ramp up power is known as startup power in BL Heli S. It's known as ramp up power in BL Heli 32. I believe the two do exactly the same thing. In the recent Blue Jay firmware, ESE firmware, it has been broken out into 3 settings: startup power, ramp up max, and ramp up min. Startup power is the power it uses to actually start the motor spinning if it gets stuck on grass, or if it's just from zero, or if it's got something stuck in the motor like gravel or dust or something. And then minimum ramp up power, as far as I understand it, is the minimum power that the ESC will drive to the motor in order to ramp it up from low RPM to higher RPM. And it's very specific, low RPM to high RPM. And maximum ramp up power is the maximum power it'll use to ramp it up from low RPM to max RPM. So the ESC has kind of a beat on what the bell is doing and where the magnets are spinning and where they are in their rotational axis. And it can decide how much power might be needed to spin the motor up from low RPM to higher RPM based on the amount of electromagnetic force that's being fed back to the ESC from the actual motor bell spinning and passing by the stator poles, which is generating a backwards electromagnetic force. And so here is the very basic finding. This is not correct in any technical sense. This is a very layman's understanding of how it may or may not work. Again, I don't know if this will work for your quad. It definitely won't work for all quads, but I'll discuss more of the implications about it after I try to convey what I think may be the easiest way to understand this. So ramp up power is how much power the ESC uses to drive the motor bell up from low RPM to high RPM. If the ramp up power is reduced, it somewhat loosens the response to PID inputs, not stick inputs or anything, PID inputs. If the ramp up power is increased, it kind of tightens up the response to PID inputs. If the ramp up power is too high, you could get not an over response from the PID inputs, but it'll respond so quickly that it'll overshoot, and then you'll get this feedback loop where the quad will kind of flutter up to the sky. An early sign of this is when you do rolls and flips, you might hear this kind of robotic sound from the motors, which if you've built a lot of quads, you may relate to noise in the system or vibrations in the system, which you are going to try and figure out how to resolve. Oftentimes you'll look at the black box and you'll see that the lines are all over the place and you can't even begin to figure out what on earth is going on, let alone what to do to try and resolve the issue. And if you drop the PIDs to almost zero, you can pretty much solve this issue, this fluttering issue, or this motor whiny noise issue. And the quad will fly like crap because the PIDs are at zero. If the ramp up power is too low, the quad will generally just feel loose. It will feel like it doesn't really have great prop wash handling, and you cannot tune the PIDs to get them anywhere close to what you might want them to be if you had a nicely tuned quad that performed as you wished. So I will call this the response to the PID loop. However, I would say that I think that this setting, along with DMAG and motor timing, need to be set before you even begin to consider your filters, before you even begin to consider adding a capacitor or a bigger capacitor to your ESC board to kind of manage the noise feedback, electronic noise feedback coming from the motors. Because you can actually forego the need of a capacitor in some minor sense by reducing your ramp up power, because it also reduces the backwards electromagnetic force coming into the system, and it reduces the noise in the whole system. So the quad that you saw flying at the beginning was a 300 gram 5.25 inch 2204 2800 kV quad on 3S, which these numbers don't really add up to a quad that Betaflight or any flight code really wants. It wants a quad that's around 500 to 600 grams. It's got a 2207, 2306 with 5-inch props, and it's going to perform great on stock, whatever you put it on, and any frame you put it on. All those quads will perform great. The problem comes into play when you start running setups that are kind of a little bit outside the performance window that Betaflight or any flight code typically wants. Now, this is not a foolproof way to improve things, but I have found that it can improve things significantly on quads that I even thought were flying well. So what this could do, or what I've found that it seems to do, is that it kind of slides the quad's performance up and down a scale where you could reach a zone where Betaflight or any flight code will be more comfortable, and then the default PIDs will work better, and it'll be way easier to tune your filters, and you'll get lines in your black box that make sense, and you'll know what to do with because they actually make sense and they're not all over the place with no explanation. So if you've ever flown a quad or tried to build a quad that's like super tiny, like a 3-inch on 6S that's super light, you may have noticed that it flutters to the sky or has just extreme noise, or it's impossible to tune, or the quad just generally has no power because the ESCs are just super reducing the power output because it doesn't know what to do because there's so much noise in the system. It's as simple as just reducing the power up timing. And that's what I found fixed the issues with the most recent setups that I've been trying on 3-inch. If you're flying a quad that's 7-inch or above, and it doesn't have the power output of a typical 5-inch, which kind of almost anything larger than a 5-inch quad will have a lower disc loading ratio or power output ratio, or kind of like all the ratios of performance are worse when you kind of go up beyond 5-inch. In most cases, unless you do something very special or specific to get the quad to have better performance than would be typical if you just ran a typical setup. I'm trying to mitigate those people that are going to say, oh, but my 7-inch flies incredible on whatever default. Okay, I'm glad that your quad flies great, but in reality, most of the time, you'll build a typical 7-inch and it'll fly worse than a 5-inch quad, no matter what you try and get it to do with your tuning or filters or whatnot. And this is a way to actually drastically improve the performance. On my own 7-inch quads, I increased the ramp up power, and the overall response to the PID loop and the response to everything that was happening on the quad improved drastically. Even the throttle pump issue is drastically improved on Betaflight and EmuFlight, no matter what you're running. So if you're running like a Cinelifter rig and you're dealing with this hefty quad that is lifting something that it really doesn't want to lift, you could find some pretty significant improvements. Now, a pretty big warning here: if ramp up power is too high or too low, or if it's outside of what the system might want it to be, you could run into desync problems. You could run into motors that don't even spin, or you could run into slipping problems where the quad just starts yawing out of control. This is true of default ramp up power as well, and this is where there's a giant wrench thrown into the equation, because depending on which ESC you use, the ramp up power performance varies. So on some ESCs, primarily HGLRC ESCs so far that I found from talking to like 100 people about this issue, their ramp up power performance is actually lower on the 6 or 7 ESCs that have had these issues, is lower than most other ESCs. But on some of the T-motor ESCs, we found that the ramp-up power performance is actually higher than the default on most ESCs. All of them are set to the same default. All of them are going to be set to 0.5 default, but the overall performance output is going to be less than the 0.5 or greater than the 0.5, and now it's really windy. This video has already gone on longer than it should have gone, but I'll point out one other advantage here. If you're running a quad that has low KV and you want to run it on lower voltage consistently, like a 6S quad that you're going to be running on 4S almost exclusively or most of the time, you could actually turn up the ramp up power, and by doing so, the quad will fit the PID loop better, and it'll be like you're flying a quad that is appropriately tuned for the voltage that you're running. Or vice versa, if you're flying a quad that's like 2500 kV and you're going to run 6S on it, you could actually reduce the ramp up power, and it's not going to have the same effect, but it'll be, if you have issues running it at 6S, it can help with managing the tune of a quad that is over KV for the setup that you're running, for the voltage that you're going to be running. And the low that actual variation is a little bit different, because it really depends on a lot of factors. Because when you have too much KV, the overall torque in the system is a little bit different. But when you have too little KV, the torque in the system can vary as well, but it's much more manageable if you go down in voltage. It's much harder to run higher voltages with higher everything because of all the noise and the environment that you're running it in. So basically, I hope that the fact that I wanted to spend the time, even though I'm just trying to pile up my time and triple booking myself, to make this video about essentially tuning. I still don't really tune my PIDs. I have tried here and there, and I will adjust them, a couple notches. I'll try to use the sliders here and there. Sometimes I get improvements, sometimes I don't. I'm pretty sure that's typically what everybody runs into as well. Give this a shot. I think that ramp up power is an incredibly important setting to adjust before you do anything else. And I'm really surprised that the KISS ESCs don't even have this setting in them, and I suspect that they'll be adding them soon, because if we're all going to be running these 250 gram 6S or whatever quads on whatever motors, we're going to have issues. We're definitely going to run into issues. No doubt we're going to be running into issues. Like, I've been building these sorts of things for years, and a lot of the quads just haven't worked at all, and I haven't known how to get them to work. So I just gave up and threw the quads, literally just threw the quads away because I was so frustrated by them. So yeah, brush your teeth, floss them, have good oral hygiene, because if COVID taught me anything, it's that people have a really difficult time keeping their teeth in good shape. So please heed these words and floss your teeth. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.